The Financial Edge NXT is a true GAAP and FASB compliant fund accounting system that's specifically designed to meet the reporting requirements of nonprofit organizations. In today's presentation, we're going to be taking a look at the allocation management function of the Financial Edge. The allocation management module of the system allows organizations the ability to automate the journal entries associated with direct or indirect allocations that you may have for overhead expenses, investment activity, or anything else you need to allocate at the organization. In the two examples that Crystal Stairs shared with us, in the first example they had an administrative overhead allocation of cell phone expenses to different funds, and in the second example they had a reallocation of bank charges based on the number of transactions inside of accounts payable. We're going to be taking a look at both of those examples this morning. The first example we're going to take a look at is the administrative overhead expense example of the cell phone activity. And to automate this allocation within the Financial Edge, we're going to be using the simple allocation function. So for this example, what we have are some year-to-date expenses allocated out to different funds, and each one of those funds are holding a certain percentage of that overall balance. What I want to do is I want to take that cell phone overhead expense amount and I want to reallocate it to our different funds based on their percentage of that overall balance. I was able to set up that example here in the Financial Edge utilizing our simple allocation functionality. Within our simple allocation function, you're able to identify specifically what it is that you want to allocate. So in this first example, I'm identifying that I want to allocate my cell phone activity. Now, how does the system identify of all the transactions within the Financial Edge what's allocated to my my cell phone overhead expense? It could be allocated to an account, it could be allocated to a specific expense category or code. Within the configuration of the Financial Edge, you're going to have the ability to set up different levels of information that can be captured on a transaction by transaction basis. These different levels can then be utilized to identify how to group together transactions for processes like reallocations. This is all going to be designed with your consultant based on ultimately what are your reporting requirements that you have and what are the ways that we can make things most efficient within the Financial Edge. So our first step, identifying specifically what it is I want to reallocate. My second step is identifying, once I know what I want to reallocate, what am I reallocating it to? So I'm able to identify the specific funds that I want to reallocate this activity to. These are the funds that are included to identify what that total balance is. Now also, just like the different types of levels that you have for tracking information, I can identify specifically what funds I want to be included in this calculation. So I don't necessarily have to include all the funds that I have in my system. I can just include the ones that I want to. So once again, this is sort of identifying for you the level of control that you're going to have over this process to identify how these allocations should be created. Our next step is to identify the date range of activity. In the example that you've provided us, you want to see all the year-to-date information included in this balance to identify its percentages. You will have that ability to do that, but you can also choose other date range parameters as well. So if you only want to look at information for a certain time frame or net change of a certain time frame, you're going to have the ability to define that level of control as well. And then the last step is the journal entry. This is also going to be identified based on exactly how should this journal entry be created. Since I'm just doing an overhead reallocation to different funds or departments, I'm going to be debiting and crediting the same account and then just reallocating it to my funds that way. But once again, depending on how the system is configured specifically for Crystal Stairs, this will determine the width and breadth of what this journal entry ultimately looks like. So once I now have all of my steps in place, I have the ability to run my pre-allocation report. And as I generate my pre-allocation report, it's going to show me a couple of different things. The first thing that my pre-allocation report is going to identify for me is specifically what is the dollar amount that I'm wanting to reallocate. So it was the balance that was sitting in just one of my cell phone expense accounts. Depending once again on how your chart of accounts is built out, this could potentially be a multitude of different account numbers. So you have this wonderful ability once again to specifically control exactly how much or how little information is included to identify what that actual balance is. And this balance is in line with the balance that you had shared with us. The next thing it shows me is what activity that I have in Financial Edge that was allocated to these different funds for that year-to-date time frame that I've identified. This also not only is showing me the dollar amount, but is also showing me each fund's percentage of that overall balance. So this also is in line with what you had shared with us for this particular example of being able to see, the dollar amounts, the percentages, all broken out appropriately, and then that leads us to this actual allocated dollar amount, which I'm now going to see on the bottom of the screen, or in going on to the next screen. So based on the actual breakdown that I have, how much is being allocated? Well, it's 12 cents to this fund, it's 69 cents to this fund, it's $11.55 to this fund. Same sort of breakdown. And then as I go to my next page, it continues with that actual breakdown as well. So all of the different allocations and distributions that you need the Financial Edge to be able to create for you, and these types of overhead allocations are going to once again be standardized within the system. The beauty of this is that once you set this up one time, you can utilize these over and over again. So I've also utilized that same parameter set, but I made some small changes to it. The change I made was, instead of looking at my cell phone activity that I want to reallocate, now let me look at my admin expenses or any other type of expense that I want to allocate. Any other overhead expense, I can just make that one small change right here. So instead of having to start again from scratch, I just told the system, instead of doing cell phones this time, now let's do administrative expenses. My basis is going to stay the same because I'm still wanting to utilize that same breakdown of all those accounts. Calculation dates are still going to be the same because I want to look at my year-to-date activity, and then my general ledger entries here. This may potentially be different, once again, like I said, based on the actual journal entries that you want the system to make. And now once I run this calculation, this is now going to be a completely separate calculation based on the one that I saw earlier, because now instead of looking at $1,353, I'm now looking at a little bit over almost 1.4 million. I'm still seeing the same breakdown, but now I'm allocating out much larger dollar amounts based on each one of those funds percentage of that overall balance. So you'll see this tool set is very flexible, and once it's been configured and set up one time, you could use it over and over again and make small edits or changes as necessary. So that was my first example. That was my simple allocation to manage those overhead allocations associated with different types of expenses that you may have. The second allocation that we're going to take a look at is what's called my direct allocation, and this is for my bank fees. So for this particular example, you had shared with us a tracking of bank fee activity. So here I have a little $2,400 in bank fees associated with numbers of transactions, and then I have these different transactions associated with these different contracts, or these contract numbers are associated with these different counts of activity. I'm going to be able to utilize my account report here. I built a account report to track for me counts of invoices associated with certain contracts. So as we are going through the process once again of configuring the system, we'll be able to break out your records in a way to allow us to group out these transactions by these actual different contract numbers, and then I'm going to see those counts here within the database. 6 invoices, 1 invoice, 3, however many invoices it is, or however many contracts or records on a contract by contract level. So that's going to be the first part of my process, is just running that report so I have those numbers. The second step in this process is going to be the actual creation of the allocation itself. So I'm wanting to utilize once again my pool, and the pool that I'm utilizing in this example are my transaction fees. So I just call this one CS Trans, but those are my bank fees that I want to, that's the total balance that I want to reallocate. And then just like on my simple allocation, I identify the journal entry that I want the system to make. I identify my actual breakdown of information here for this particular allocation. Here are my counts of transactions by contract number. Once again, where I'm pulling these numbers up from that report that I had ran earlier. So I'm just populating these numbers into this report. I do my same sort of date range calculation. So do I want to look at all my activity for all dates? Do I want to look at activity for just year to date? What date range of information is it that I actually want to see on this particular screen? And then I can run my pre-allocation report here. And when I run this particular pre-allocation report, this one is now showing me on my first tab, or my first page, what's the dollar amount that I want to reallocate. It's my $2,400 and $2,435.25. So that's in line with the actual dollar amount that I want to distribute. And because I've identified specifically on my distribution tab the number of transactions, on my second page, it now actually shows me the total amount that it wants to allocate out to each one of my different accounts, funds, breakdowns, whatever, however it is. Once again, I want to allocate it out. This shows me what that breakdown actually is. So it's letting me know it's going $17.05 broken out here, $100.82 broken out here, $281.76 over here, which is in line with what I was being able to look to have the system automatically allocate out for me. So all those balances are going to automatically be in line here based on how I want to build out these different distribution sets. Once again, this was just one example or two examples of how we would potentially configure and set this up within the system. As you're actually working with one of the Blackbaud consultants, they're going to sit down and get a very good sort of deep holistic understanding of all the different allocations that you need, all the different types of reports that you build, all the different ways that you need to share information and data, and then based on how you ultimately need to use the information at the end of the day, then that's how we determine specifically the best way to configure these allocation sets for you and automate them within the process. With that, this was just, like I said, a high-level sort of overview of that allocation function. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to share those questions with Susan. I'm more than happy to answer those questions for you, or if we want to have a follow-up presentation where I can walk through these examples with you on the phone and give you an opportunity to ask questions sort of live throughout the process, Susan and I would be more than happy to do that as well. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope everyone has a most wonderful day.